Hello guys. Here is what we are going to create today. Stay with me to the end of this video. Let's start. First I imported this image, transformed and adjusted it on top of this 3D structure. I then applied a layer mask to this image and hid unnecessary parts. Next I used grass brush and made the edges a bit more realistic. Here we go. Next I added a lot of adjustment layers, such as color balance to balance the colors, hue and saturation to desaturate it a bit, and 2 exposure layers to add highlights and shadows. Here is the result. I imported this image and distorted it and placed it on top of this main background layer. I hid it by applying black mask to it. I will use this layer later. Next I imported this barn. The perspective was not matching, so I used perspective warp and fixed it. You will find perspective warp under edit menu. After many attempts, here is the result. I later adjusted it again and again. Now I started adding shadows. Just created a new layer below the barn and started painting with black brush with 20% opacity. The light is coming from the back right side of the image. I kept adjusting the shadows and perspective. Next I added hue and saturation adjustment layer and desaturated the barn and darkened it a bit. Next I added exposure layer and added shadows to the barn. I made front a bit darker as light is coming from behind, adjusted these shadows and here we go. Now I added another exposure layer and created highlights by increasing exposure. Then inverted the mask by pressing Ctrl+I. Then started painting with white. Here is the final result. Next I added a layer mask to the barn and started painting with black at the bottom of the barn. I am using grass brush. Next I added this image of hay, adjusted its perspective. Then created a haystack inside the barn. I used layer masks to hide some parts of the image. Then I added shadows to the stack and here is the result. Next I added this mouse, I don't know why, but I just did. I added it on top of the haystack. It is not going to be visible when zoomed out. But I kept that guy there. I next added this wooden box. Then adjusted its perspective using perspective warp. Next I added some shadows below it. Then added exposure layer and made some shadows on the box. I darkened the front of this box. Next I added another exposure layer and made lights on top and side of this box. I made these dark lines more contrasty. And also added slight lights to these bags. Here we go. I then added this wagon. First, make sure you make groups of similar elements and name them. Now adjusted its perspective, added a shadow below it. Then added highlights and shadows. And adjusted some other things as well. Now, if you are interested in this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Next I added this beautiful tree. I used select subject and selected this tree, then used select and mask option to refine the edges. I hid the barn group to work with this only. Next I created a new layer from it and made it a smart object. Now placed it here and adjusted its size. Then added few adjustment layers to make it pop more. Next added a shadow below this tree. And then added shadows and highlights to the tree. Here is the result. Next I added this burrow image. And placed it here. Now it took me several hours to make it look perfect. The more I tried, the more terrible it looked. And at last I gave up and tried to hide it using these flowers. But it did not work. I deleted these layers and then tried again for some time till I reached on this result. Now I used this image which I added on top of the green surface. I started revealing that image and it started looking a bit better. I added this image again, then warped it and then added a black layer mask to it. Then I revealed it on top side of the burrow. Note, I warped it a lot more than needed, so try not to warp things more than needed. I added several adjustment layers and here is the result. I placed that flower plant on right side. I kept adjusting other things in the process. Now I added this rabbit. Placed it here and added shadow below it, and also on top of it. Next I added another rabbit and placed this one on top of burrow. I added shadows and highlights to both of them. Then I added this flower pot on this wooden box. And also added a rooster. Added shadows and adjusted other stuff. Next I added this hen and adjusted it. Next, I created a fence, where I am going to put some sheep. I joined 4 of these similar layers together and here is the result. Next I gave it a little bit more detail by adding shadows and highlights. I created these shadows and highlight by just creating 2 separate new layers for shadows and lights, then painted with black to add shadows and painted with white to add highlights. It did not look perfect but I stopped because I am lazy. Next I created a sharp shadow manually, by painting with black brush. Next I decreased its opacity and it looked better. Here we go. Next I added these sheep. I cut them out from their background layer. And placed them inside this fencing. I moved this hen a bit and adjusted shadows. Next I added shadows to them by using exposure layer. I did not add highlights as these sheep were already bright. I also added a shadows below them. I also added this fox to the scene. I adjusted it by making it darker and also added a shadow to it. I added these eagles and added highlight to them. Now I started working on the sides. First, I added the left side, distorted it and placed it as needed. Then added another image on the right side and distorted that too, and placed it on the right side. I added this mossy texture image and placed it below these 2 sides. Then I revealed only the top part of this mossy texture. Then I added shadows to the sides to make them look a bit darker. And here is the final result. And remember to make groups and name them properly. Now I grouped all the layers together, named it spring. Then duplicated the layer and made a smart object from this duplicated layer. Now was the time to add camera raw filter to this image. You can find it under filter menu. I adjusted some settings, I gave it a cooler look, darkened the shadows and lightened the highlights and also gave it a sharp look. Here is the output. Then I took away some color by adding hue and saturation layer and also added some more shadows. Here is the final result. After looking at this image for some time, I realized that sheep look a bit too big and also some stuff was missing. I readjusted the whole image and here is the final image. Let me know in the comments whether you like this video or not, and also let me know where to improve. Don't forget to subscribe if you like this content. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Till then check out these videos.